All right, folks. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I suspect there'll still be some folks trickling into the room as we get moving. But good afternoon, good morning, depending on geography, and welcome. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to open today's conversation around um, watershed-scale collaboration as an essential approach to advancing climate adaptation outcomes, and super excited to have colleagues here in Massachusetts joining to share their perspectives on that. My name is John Peterson. I'm on staff for the Network for Landscape Conservation, and I'm joining from Western Massachusetts myself today, where I can report we awoke this morning to a dusting of snow, um, and I think I haven't been outside yet since sitting down this morning, but I think it's mostly melted by now. But a nice reminder, perhaps, that the wheels of the season continue to spin, and just hoping that the seasons are bringing you all joy and happiness and an opportunity to get out and connect with those places that are so meaningful to you and in your own landscapes. Um, as we get started here, I just wanted to take a moment to provide a little bit of context on the Network for Landscape Conservation. The network was formed in 2011 and really is that national umbrella group and leading voice for advancing collaborative landscape conservation and stewardship. Um, our work really is focused on connecting people to ideas and innovation, and to one another. And it's that last point that resonates most deeply with me, that connection to one another. And I really do like to think of the network not as an organization, but much more so as a community that's connected by shared work, the work of collaborating for landscape outcomes, and a shared desire to see that work done better, more effectively. And so that's really where this webinar series comes from. That opportunity for us to come together on an ongoing basis to harvest and elevate the insights and observations that are emerging in landscapes across the country around the how-to of collaborative landscape conservation and stewardship, and really to create these opportunities um, for learning, for exchange, and for dialogue amongst ourselves as we collectively think about how we can do our work more effectively, how we can advance our practice. And I'm super excited that today we get to welcome two guests to today's webinar. Stefanie Covino, who is a program manager at the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative in Eastern Massachusetts, and Melissa Ocana, who is climate adaptation coordinator at University of Massachusetts Amherst here in Western Massachusetts. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to offer and bring forward in terms of insights around how watershed scale collaboration is essential for advancing climate adaptation outcomes. And part of why I'm so excited for today's conversation is I think what Melissa and Stefanie will speak to really underscores the way in which landscapes can serve as integrators. I think we're increasingly recognizing that the challenges that we're wrestling with, that we're grappling with, the work that we're doing to overcome these challenges, these are systems level challenges and are interconnected. The biodiversity crisis, the climate change crisis, the environmental justice crisis, these don't happen in isolation and separate from one another, but they're interwoven and really emerge from the intersection of biophysical and sociocultural systems. And so how can we think about that intersection and explore that intersection in ways that allow us to accelerate our work? Um, And I think what's called for in navigating that space is the ability to work across boundaries, to work across sectors, to work across perspectives, and even to work across cultures. And and that's really what the essence of landscape conservation is. I think we still struggle for language in some ways to articulate the complexity, the nuance, and the potential of what collaborative landscape conservation embodies. But in so many ways, I think of it as really nothing more than an effort to build a collective conversation around how we as communities are coming together to think about and shape our relationships into the future with those places that we live and care so deeply about. And so again, I'm so excited for Melissa and Stefanie to bring us into conversation today. And again, I think the power of what they speak to is the recognition of that holistic perspective and how we can really integrate across biophysical and sociocultural systems and thinking about our work at the landscape level. Before I hand off to Melissa and Stefanie, I just wanted to take a moment to touch on format here. And very candidly, we're experimenting today, and much much appreciation to Stefanie and Melissa for their willingness and flexibility and patience as we experiment with format here. We've moved away from a Zoom format for today's conversation and Zoom webinar format, and are really working to use the Zoom meeting format today, in large part because we want to create that space for dialogue and dynamic exchange. Stefanie and Melissa, we're going to turn to you momentarily for presentations, and we'll sort of pick up that conventional approach to kick off the webinar. But as we move forward, we're going to get into questions and answers. And then we'll invite those of you that are willing and interested in continuing the conversation to utilize breakouts at the end of today to have a chance to hear from one another and explore the conversation in greater nuance within your own contexts. And really our hope is that it does allow us to connect, to hear from two thought leaders in this space, but also to hear from the insights and observations that you all are bringing forward in your own work. So what we would ask as we listen to the presentations from Melissa and Stefanie, please stay on mute. You can leave your cameras off if you want, or leave them on. But as we get into Q&As, we'll invite folks to turn on cameras and come off mute to really pick up the conversation. As Melissa and Stefanie proceed, please utilize the chat to share questions. I think we'll hold off on any questions until after the presentations, but do use that chat as a chance to capture your thoughts and questions in the moment. And I think that's all I wanted to cover by way of introduction. I think, Melissa, I'm going to turn it to you to just pick up on the polling, and then we'll dive into it. But super thrilled to welcome Melissa and Stefanie. Thanks.
Thanks so much, John. Again, Melissa Ocana. I'm the Climate Adaptation Coordinator with the University of Massachusetts Cooperative Extension. And we do have some polling this morning just to give us a sense of who's in the Zoom room. And we appreciate that we're going to be diving into some of these topics a bit more deeply later today, but wanting to get a snapshot. And hopefully you can see the results of the poll right now on your screens as well. So it looks like 65% of folks are in a collaborative or a network. And many of you are working at the watershed scale, 73%. If you're in a collaborative or network, what stage are you in? It looks like about 50% are growing, followed very much right after that by nascent. And what is something that you're interested in getting better at? Many folks are interested in incorporating climate adaptation strategies more deeply, followed by working at the watershed scale and equitable community engagement. Yes, thank you so much for indulging us in the poll. And I'm going to pass it over to Stefanie to get started.
Thank you, Melissa. So I'm Stefanie Covino from the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why watershed scale, why collaboration, and use our watershed collaborative of the Blackstone as an example as we go through. So I am located in central Massachusetts. I also work in northern Rhode Island, and I just want to make a recognition that wherever you are, you're on Indigenous land, and we do recognize that in my watershed. It's mostly the Nipmuc, Narragansett, Wampanoag. But wherever you are, this is a great tool. If you're not familiar with it, it's nativeland.ca, and it can tell you an idea of which tribes are in your region that you can connect with. Because as we know, our tribes and Indigenous partners are not only our original land stewards, but are some of the best partners that we have to steward this land. So why watershed scale? We break it down into 3 reasons. So number 1 is that climate impacts are water focused. So we know that depending on where you are in the country, climate change is affecting you differently, but definitely here in the Northeast, we are experiencing a lot of water and no water. So for instance, these are all in Worcester County in Massachusetts. In August of 2021, we had massive floods. 2022 was a huge drought, which was a great year to pick to do a 60-mile paddle. We ended up dragging our boats for 2 miles on the main stem of our main river here on the Blackstone. We think that it got diverted into the canal that we have. And then in 2023, most recently, we had really significant storms again. So all of this water focus really makes sense to work at that watershed scale for climate change. Number 2 is that watersheds, if you're a watershed person, we're looking at like the HUC 8 or HUC 10 level, which is hydrologic unit code. They provide meaningful boundaries for us to work in. So for instance, in the Blackstone, we incorporate about 39 different municipalities, 2 states, a lot of different tribes over about a 48-mile long river. It's about 475 square miles altogether. It's a pretty big region. I know some of you are coming from other areas that you have massive regions. We have some partners that work across multiple states entirely. And it can be really hard to see change at that level, but this can kind of provide us a meaningful boundary of these communities all have a shared history and culture around that river, and also can be close enough to really know what's going on, which gets to our 3rd point. We call it the Goldilocks scale of making meaningful local and regional impacts. When you do things at a small scale, sometimes it can feel like you're not doing enough. But this watershed scale at this level really provides us an opportunity to know what's going on with our communities. So for instance, on the top right, that's my mom actually doing a invasive water chestnut pull at a local pond that we have. It was 20 acres of water chestnut. We ended up pulling the edges and treating the center of it. But we can be involved in these really small scale projects with, 10 people showing up and promote those. But also on the left, if anyone recognizes this lovely lady, that is U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland. And she came to our region to talk more about tribal connections and hear what's going on with the restoration efforts on our river. And she met with us. So we can kind of have this bigger picture impact of getting national attention, but also this small scale of having really local connections as well. So probably the folks on this call, I don't have to convince you of why collaboration. You're probably part of the NLC because you believe in collaboration. Just as John said, it's learning what's going on in our watersheds and our landscapes, but also between one another and learning from one another. So we know that climate change is very complicated and we need a lot of different folks to work on this, whether you are focused on, whether you're focused on dam removals, we know climate change will affect that, combined sewer overflows, invasive species growth, all of these things are going to be affected by climate change, and we need to be able to come at it from all of these different angles. It's also absolutely urgent. This is not something, again, as you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, but climate change is not tomorrow, it's yesterday, it's last year, it's last decade. This is happening now, it's affecting us in a lot of different ways, but we don't have time to reinvent the wheel and duplicate efforts. So working together is the best way. And then there are a lot of different emerging practices. As we explore whether those are working or not and what works best, we need to be able to share that information freely and be able to learn from one another to be the most effective we can moving forward. So we know that collaboratives help to build community and camaraderie. This is an example on the bottom left. We had a migratory fish parade. So migratory fish haven't been on the Blackstone River for over 200 years because we have a head of tide dam. And we had this parade to get people involved about hearing, why is this important? Why does it connect with you culturally, economically, ecologically? And we had all these folks just kind of walking by that came in and said, oh, this is so cool. I never heard about this. What are you doing? So being able to get all of these different partners together and get folks that wouldn't maybe otherwise be a part of the conversation involved. It also really helps to build peer-to-peer learning. And also, I can't actually read the last one there. Let me minimize this. I'm so sorry. There we go. Bring diverse perspectives. Sorry about that. But again, getting everyone involved from different perspectives and being able to share why they're coming at it, how they're coming at it, and be able to learn from one another. In the Blackstone, we know we have a shared watershed, which also means we have a lot of shared goals. So we have a great water quality monitoring program that has been going on for 19 years, and they do a great job at it, but they're really just focused on that water quality monitoring. So being able to bring them into a collaborative, we have about 125 different partners that work together. We have monthly meetings, and we have this umbrella to bring together all these different folks to be able to think about what's going on in these different topics and hear how we can support one another. We want to advance aquatic connectivity. We have thousands of undersized culverts and unnecessary dams in our watershed. So we've run training programs on how to assess your culverts and put them into a regional database. I mentioned water chestnut is a big deal. There are a lot of other aquatic invasives that we're dealing with as well. We have a bikeway that has different chunks of sections along our river, and we're trying to connect all of those back together. So someone that might be just interested in recreation can still be part of this work, and they might not know a lot about restoration or water chestnut, et cetera. Access is really important. This is a river that is often hidden behind a highway. It is down a really steep bank or has a lot of poison ivy before you can get to it. It's hard to access. So access points like this are really invaluable, and we're trying to identify where we can create more of those to be able to create really equitable access to our different communities. And then I mentioned fish passage with these migratory fish. This is something we're really focused on, especially with our Indigenous partners. We are trying to create passage over the lowest of our 4 dams. We still have 19 on the main stem of our river to be able to access a spawning habitat for several different species, including herring. So as you know, climate change impacts are really exacerbated by our land use patterns, and this is really central to our mission. So we were created not just to be able to provide a clearinghouse of information or to connect people together, but to really focus on how we can create resilient communities as well as water quality improvements. So I know you know this, rains in a forest, water soaks in, right? Rains in a city, where does that water go? It goes into the storm drain. It goes into that grate on the side of the road. And as we add more impervious surfaces with development, we're having all of those, that stormwater runoff create more nutrients that are going into our water body. In Massachusetts, stormwater runoff is the #1 cause of water quality impairment in our state, in our watershed. We also experience higher temperatures with climate change, which again is exacerbated by hotter pavement. Extreme precipitation creates these really flashy systems, a lot of flooding, not just due to these undersized culverts and dams, but also a lot of this just stormwater runoff and affecting our communities as well. And then increased drought. Both of these seem challenging, but we have both in this area. And we're already seeing that some of our communities are experiencing drinking water shortages, and some private residents have had to re-drill their wells because they've gone dry. We know that the impacts from climate change are not felt equitably, and they're also compounded. So this is a map of our watershed looking at the environmental justice areas in their priority. And whether we are looking at heat islands or low tree cover, high asthma rates, flooding impacts, low water quality, these same areas are getting hit again and again with all of these different challenges. And it's the communities that have the least ability to respond to those. And so the collaborative really tries to focus on those specific areas to provide enhanced capacity and technical assistance. We believe that by working together with all of our different partners, we'll be able to make sure that we can have the most resilient communities in our area. So we've done tours and outreach information about combined sewer overflow. This was a self-identified issue that has come up in some of our communities. We have a really interesting combined sewer area in Worcester, Massachusetts. We've provided mapping resources. So for instance, looking at the areas to focus on for dams and culverts in the region, looking at habitat. We talk a lot about accessibility and trying to make sure that not only do we have areas where we can hike and bike and paddle along this river, but that they're accessible for all people as well, regardless of your ability level of mental or physical ability. We do a lot of advocacy work in our partners. I am mostly EPA funded, so I do not advocate, but I do educate, and a lot of our partners do advocacy as well, and we can support them in that. Fish passage is so important, and it's such a complicated issue that we needed to come in and bring this kind of overarching ability to work with a lot of different partners. We actually have our first advisory group meeting that we encourage the state of Rhode Island to create this afternoon, right after this meeting. So it's very exciting for that to be moving forward. Dams are a huge issue, as I mentioned. I'll get into a little bit more as an example about what we're working on there. Invasives, again, we know that's a challenge. And also public art. So you can come at this from all different areas, but artists that we might not otherwise engage with have been part of the collaborative because we've done the storm drain stenciling to educate people about stormwater challenges. This watershed was this river, I should say, was the site of the American Industrial Revolution in the 1700s. So we built the first water-powered cotton spinning mill in 1792, I think it was. And that has just stayed there for forever. And so we have all these dams ahead of it. Our watershed is very steep. And so we dammed this river again and again and again. And it became really modified, and because it was modified, it was ignored, and people used it as a dumping grounds. That center photo is from 1972. There was a huge effort to clean up this river, and we had 10,000 volunteers work on one day to remove 10,000 tons of trash from this river. And we can still see remnants of that. This is our paddle from last year. We counted 337 tires as we paddled down this 48 miles. So it's definitely something that we're still working on. But by able to work together with all of these different partners, we can be the most successful. People have said that we're kind of a clearinghouse for support, news, and advocacy. So sometimes we get to do this fun stuff like getting a message about paddling on the river. We had a reporter come with us for several of our trips. And then also we push back when needed. And when there was a sewage discharge from one of our wastewater treatment facilities, we helped pen a letter to the state of Rhode Island and said, we're paying attention and this is unacceptable. And maybe historically this watershed hasn't really been that active, but someone's here now and we are all working together and we're going to have an effective voice. And they ended up having the Attorney General sue the city to say, you're getting resources to work on wastewater, you need to put those back into your facility as well. I mentioned working with our different Indigenous partners. That's a big part of what we do. And every year we have 2 events. One is an intertribal gathering in the fall where we get 5 different tribes or whoever wants to come together. And we focus on why fish passage is important, not just ecologically, but also culturally. And then we've also had our fish parade that I mentioned in the spring that we're hoping to start planning again for this year. I mentioned dam removal before. This is a really hot topic, and due to the need and the lack of resources around this, we recently held just a couple weeks ago a dam removal and ecological restoration training. We had about 120 attendees, and I am definitely not a dam removal expert, but it was a need that came up and I can facilitate and I can get speakers together and organize the logistics. So we stepped into that role and offered this training that was really successful for folks. So we work on this local level to try and work on specific projects and work on restoration or conservation efforts. But we also make sure we work in this higher level to represent those communities that don't otherwise have time or resources and capacity to attend things like a regional training or a regional planning initiative for climate resilience or hazard mitigation. So we can say, we've heard this from our communities and this is what's important. We're also getting attention for it. So being able to fill in this this role for watershed scale climate collaboration has been recognized very specifically for working equitably, for working collaboratively, and working at the watershed scale. So we recently got 2 different awards, one by our regional planning agency and another by a statewide group called Mass Rivers Alliance. So you can follow my advice, which is just sort of and what makes sense for your region and start working at this scale. And we'll have a conversation later about how you can think about working at the watershed scale, making sure that you're incorporating climate resilience into your work. But now I'll hand it over to Melissa Ocana to talk a little bit more from her perspective, why we do this and how we're doing it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Steph. As you heard from Steph's example, the watershed collaboratives are doing amazing work. They're able to connect organizations and communities at a meaningful scale and to create authentic partnerships. They also create social cohesion and resilience. And we're already seeing the benefits of their work. We see how they can coordinate, thanks, I'll Steph, coordinate work on the ground and leverage additional funding. And so much of my work is about coordinating and collaborating across networks and creating space for peer-to-peer learning. And today we wanted to share a bit more about how we've approached this work. We know that some of you may be interested in gathering with your other peers and other networks. You may already be forming regional collaboratives or networks of networks across groups. So I'm going to share now about some of our efforts to inspire collaboration across these watershed partnerships through our statewide community of practice. Next slide. Thank you, Steph. MassECAN, the Massachusetts Ecosystem Climate Adaptation Network. So at MassECAN, we're 600 plus practitioners and researchers who are working on climate adaptation in Massachusetts and interested in ecosystems and nature. We build community in many ways, including through our events, our monthly newsletter, and our expert work groups. Next slide. Our expert work groups focus on areas where cross-organizational collaboration is essential for climate adaptation practices. And one of our groups is our Watershed-Scale Climate Collaboration Subgroup. Again, this brings together the leaders of watershed collaboratives from across the state, and we facilitate peer learning and community building. And this is an example of a regional network of networks model. At our group calls, the collaborative leaders take turns sharing about their work. This can include nuts and bolts of growing and sustaining a network, or it could be them posing questions and workshopping challenges that they're facing. In addition to meeting quarterly on Zoom, our group released an outreach toolkit this spring in conjunction with our in-person conference. Next slide. And if you're interested in seeing the proceedings from our conference, they're on our website. Please go ahead and check them out. Next slide. But I want to dive more deeply into our outreach toolkit. So this explores the importance of watershed-scale collaboration for climate adaptation, specifically to inspire and build capacity of new and existing collaboratives, to showcase stories from on-the-ground projects, and to try to increase support and awareness from those that we'd like to see more engaged. These could be funders or decision makers. And this toolkit, again, was created collaboratively. So the organizers of the various collaboratives created the content. It includes several pieces, including an overview. Oh, next slide, please. It has 2 case studies that are on community engagement. These were created with the Resilient Mystic Collaborative, which is in Boston. Next slide. It also has 2 short videos, which were created by our partners at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Next slide. I want to focus on our story map. So this highlights 10 collaboratives from across the state, including a little bit about their mission and their membership. And I wanted to spend a minute sharing a couple of examples since each collaborative has their own flavor. Next slide. So the Charles River Climate Compact is a voluntary partnership of 28 communities in Greater Boston, and their mission is to work collaboratively to increase climate resilience for people and natural ecosystems. They address precipitation-based flooding, sea level rise, extreme heat, and ecosystem health through regional collaboration and information sharing. They were founded in 2019 and are coordinated by a watershed association. Next slide. Another example is the Resilient Taunton Watershed Network, or RTOW. They promote resiliency in the face of climate change and development, and they consider ecological outcomes as well as economic, social, and environmental justice issues. Our town is a network of 20 local nonprofit, state, regional, and federal groups. They're coordinated by a regional planning agency, and they're in Southern Massachusetts, and they're founded in 2014. So again, I hope that you might have a chance to explore our toolkit as it's relevant to your work, and please feel free to share it. Next slide. Okay, so most recently, our group also hosted field trips to showcase on-the-ground projects of 3 of the collaboratives. And these were in partnership with the state's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program and our state's Division of Ecological Restoration. and they were lots of fun. And then we're going to close the year with a workshop on funding needs and opportunities for watershed collaboration. So again, not project implementation, for which right now there's happily quite a bit of funding, but for facilitation, relationship building, and the collaborative capacity that we need to build the trust that make the project successful. Next slide. So with that in mind, one aspect of the work that I really wanted to emphasize is making space for peer-to-peer learning, or peer learning. So for those that aren't as familiar, peer learning is a shift away from more traditional models of learning where only experts have knowledge to share. It moves towards more egalitarian or equitable models where everyone has something to offer and everyone has something to learn, and also emphasizes that we shall have equal opportunity to do so. And this can include knowledge exchange, so that's sharing of information and resources with each other, support or mutual aid where someone comes into the space with a challenge and everyone else helps provide guidance. And it could be learning together where peers are building a new skill or a new practice together. Next slide. And peer learning, again, is very important for climate adaptation. As Steph has mentioned, the need to respond to climate impacts is incredibly urgent. We literally don't have time to be reinventing the wheel with every new initiative. And instead, we need to be sharing lessons learned and building on each other's work as we're testing and exploring new practices. We have found that there are many commonalities to our work. They just are in different geographies. And so connecting across a larger region to learn from and share with each other helps everyone. And so we hope that there are some intentional opportunities in your networks for peer learning and building relationships. And here in the photo, you can see an example of our peer learning program through Ocana during an in-person nature walk. And I think with that, next slide, we're going to close. We hope that some of the stories that we've shared will be helpful to your work. And we want to leave you with a few links here for further reading, different resources that you might use in your practice. So again, the first is the toolkit that we mentioned. The second is a regional network of networks example here in New England, the RCP network, which increases the pace and practice of land conservation. The next two are about peer learning in networks specifically. So one is from Collective Mind, which supports collective action networks through trainings and resources. The second is from a group that I lead, which is the ASAP Network of Networks. It's a few years old, but is focused specifically on climate change. And then the last three resources are all about network building if you're growing your network or just starting. One is from USDN, Sustainability Directors Network. The second is kind of like the Bible of social impact networks, and that's by Plastric Taylor in Cleveland. And then the last link there is the regional climate collaboratives in California have put out a toolkit. Whew, okay, so yes, John will be sharing out the presentation and the links after today. And so the next part of our session, there's going to be an opportunity for you to reflect and share about your work with attendees in breakout rooms. But first, we're going to pause to see if there are any questions. And I think I'll hand it over to John to facilitate that.